Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with, well, you keep making these suggestions, and I feel I have no choice but to comply with at least some of them. Some of the other ones less so. We've had a little chat about that recently. But viewer's choice 2, 15 more important conductors not otherwise on any list. And they are important conductors, and they're very good conductors. And, it just goes to show the depth of talent. One of the things that I've pointed out, in the course of these years I've been doing this, is that we are drowning in greatness. I mean, not everything is like cosmically great. I mean, I get that. You know what I mean. But there is a lot of very, very good stuff out there, all of which leads us to surmise, frankly, that doing this maybe isn't as hard as it seems, and that we should not be idolizing these people the way that we do, because they are merely fulfilling their professional job descriptions in giving us great recordings of great music, and also that the classical repertoire is much hardier than we give it credit for being. We see comments. I see comments all the time, and sometimes I do it too, So there's a performance of something. It's otherwise wonderful. It has like one thing wrong that we care about, and it's like, it's a disaster. We kind of exaggerate. Well, we do exaggerate the importance of trivial things. Another topic that we've talked about actually fairly recently. And so here are 15 conductors who have made wonderful recordings. And I do want to stress when making these suggestions, it's about the recordings. This is the evidence we have of these conductors' abilities. And, however wonderful they may have been in live concerts, or however many wonderful live concerts you saw, or whatever happened on the day, that's not evidence. It really is. The evidence is the documented remains of what they did, or, if they're dead, and if they're not dead, they're ongoing efforts. And I'm very hesitant to include conductors who are not dead, because we don't know what they're going to do yet. We don't know how important they are, or how their careers are going to take shape. And so there are a lot of, considerations. And I try and tailor these lists fairly narrowly to really be specific to the recorded legacy. But even doing that, there's just an astonishing amount of these people out there. Really, it's kind of amazing, isn't it? In fact, I should probably add one to the bottom, because we just talked about him, didn't we? And he was a wonderful conductor. And so let's put him back. We'll make it 16 more important conductors. There, and we'll get to him at the very end. Amazing, isn't it? When you do these things, it's just incredible. All right, so here we are with the list. Let's start with Edward Gardner, who is happily still with us. Edward Gardner records for Chandos, and he's done some really, really first-class stuff. Madachic, and not just the usual British things. He is a vibrant and interesting musical personality. Even his Brahms, which, I didn't know whether to like or hate, I wound up liking, because it was very quick and fleet and anti-romantic and kind of interesting. The guy's got ideas and talent, and really has done some wonderful, wonderful things so far. So, you can look up my reviews here and on ClassicsToday.com. Definitely somebody to look out for. One of the things you wanted was a list of up-and-comers who we should be looking out for. Well, how would I know who those people are? I would have to be going to concerts all over the world constantly, every minute of every day, to hear unknown conductors or budding conductors budding. And I'm not in a position to decide whether anyone's any good or not when they're just budding. I can review an individual performance, but you can't judge a career. Careers are based on evidence. And evidence in this biz means recordings. So there you go. Edward Gardner is definitely on the list. Josef Krips. Sure, why not? That great Schubert Ninth Oh my goodness, wonderful Mozart with the Concertgebouw. Yeah, sure. He definitely belongs on the list. The amazing Don Giovanni on Decca with that amazing Vienna cast. I mean, okay. So yeah, he should have been on some list somewhere, but he just didn't make it. Why? Not because I liked him less or he wasn't good or didn't make the cut, just because there are too many damn names. There's too much good stuff. And that's why the classical record industry is in the situation it's in. And every so often, these things get boxed up and reissued, and we look at them and we go, oh, they were so wonderful. Why did everybody ignore them when they were still alive and still making records? And oh, it's so fabulous, and it's amazing, and it's a legacy, and it's like nothing else. And yeah. So that just adds to the problem, doesn't it? Because when you total up all of these people, wow, what an absurd pile of fine work we are forced to contend with. So Josef Krips, for sure. Lamberto Gardelli. So a couple of you mentioned him, and I think that was really, really, really smart. He was a splendid opera conductor. I mean, that's basically what he did. He did a couple recordings of non-operatic stuff, but Italian things like horrible Pines of Rome on EMI, and but what he's known for is that wonderful series on Philips, now Decca, of the early Verdi operas, which were extraordinarily important recordings and very, very nicely done. So he certainly deserves a shout out, especially in the category of opera conductors. John Wilson. Well, I've had some harsh things to say about John Wilson because he's sort of the Chandos house conductor for blockbuster repertoire with the Sinfonia of London, which is just a pickup orchestra that's doing things that so many other people have done so much better. But on the other hand, he's a fantastic conductor of light music, of Broadway musicals, of film scores, of lots of other things. He's trying to find a niche. He jumped into the sort of, Werktreu authenticity bandwagon by trying to do Ravel according to original manuscripts, as if we care. I mean, really? At this point, it's like, don't waste our time. And so, the jury is out on Wilson, but he just made a fantastic recording of William Walton, the suite from Troilus and Cressida, and the violin concerto. His tempi tend to be rather swift, which is a good thing on the whole, and there's room there. There's room for hope. So I stuck him on the list because he's a busy recording artist, and so we have the evidence. We have the evidence, and some of what he's done has been excellent, and some has been execrable, perhaps in equal measure. Enrique Batiz, the wonderful, wonderful Mexican conductor. Batiz spent most of his career, or is spending, I don't know where he is right now, or if he's still with us, I hope so, but in Mexico. And he did all of those discs of Latin American music for ASV and other labels. And they were wonderful. And he also did a couple slamming recordings, which are on Naxos, that had like the Rachmaninoff symphonic dances and oh my gosh, the Pines and Fountains and Roman festivals. I mean, just really well recorded Royal Philharmonic recordings that just blow your speakers out of the wall. A lot of fun with a very, very respectable discography. I'm already thinking, as I'm talking about these people, of more people. It's just endless, absolutely endless. Especially if you want to be narrow in like specialist categories. He's not on the list, but I was thinking, on ASV of Loris Cheknavorian, doing nothing but Armenian goodies. I mean, things like that. I mean, it's just Khachaturian and friends. So much cool stuff out there. Just so much. It's terrible. Alun Francis. A couple of you mentioned Alun Francis, who was one of the stalwarts of the CPO catalog. He did stuff like Pedersen symphonies and, interesting off the beaten path repertoire. And I don't think he made a bad record. I really don't. I mean, you may not care about the repertoire, but he certainly presented it effectively and sympathetically, and was extraordinarily consistent and reliable. When I refer to people in the past tense, by the way, let's just get this out of the way. I am not assuming that they're dead. I am assuming that the recordings exist, and so they were made in the past tense. They were recorded, and so I don't want you to think that I'm writing them off completely. But the legacy, the recorded legacy, is in the past tense by definition. So let's get that out of the way, because some of you have mentioned that too. Ingo Metzmacher. Now, Ingo Metzmacher is a really good conductor. He did the complete symphonies of what's his name, and what's his name was such a major composer. Whose name is just eluding me now, and I feel like a complete moron. No, Hartmann. Thank you. Hartmann, who was absolutely terrific. The Hartmann symphonies, one of the great 20th century symphonic legacies. And Metzmacher did a bunch of Hartmann recordings with other contemporary things, Ives and Berg and all kinds of other stuff. He's a modern music specialist and a very, very fine one. So he should definitely get a little love, I think, from all of us. His legacy is mostly on Warner, and God knows where it is or what's happening with it now. But it's out there. It was. I don't believe I mentioned Guido Cantelli. Did I? Well, if I did, I put him on the list again. He's part of the, one of you mentioned, conductors who died young as a possible topic. And I said, no, it's not a topic because it's not a musical criterion. And then said person got a little annoyed with me because I, thought I was ridiculing his suggestion. And it wasn't the point at all. The point was to say, let's stick to musical topics. And so, yes, I don't care if conductors died young. It's sad, of course, but it's not important. What matters is their recorded legacy, and Cantelli's is very distinguished. It's not large, but it's very, very fine. I mean, if you include like live recordings and things, it doubles. So, there's a good pile of stuff. He was Toscanini's anointed successor, but he died in a plane crash, and Toscanini was never told because he was also on his deathbed at the time. And he never knew. It's a very sad story. But Cantelli was first class, absolutely first class. Thomas Schippers, another one who died young. Oh, my goodness. We need a Schippers box. He was a terrific opera conductor. He made some first-class orchestral recordings and choral recordings, Alexander Nevsky, Barber orchestral works, things like that. Everybody respected him, I think, very, very much. And so it's a legacy that's kind of been sidelined. It would be very, very nice if somebody at Columbia would get a hold of all of that stuff and put it together for us, so that it could all be reevaluated. And said there's some fantastic opera recordings too. So, Schippers for sure. Eduardo Mata, who I was talking about fairly recently because he did some excellent stuff in Dallas. He did a Ravel cycle that was just splendid, and he was wonderful. He was wonderful at the sort of Franco-Spanish Mediterranean composers, French music, Saint-Saëns, the Organ Symphony, things he did for Dorian, and with the Orquesta Sinfónica Simón Bolívar in Venezuela, which were just marvelous recordings. And I had the great privilege to go to Venezuela and meet him and be there for some of those recording sessions, courtesy of then Dorian Records, which then went spectacularly bust afterwards, probably because, they treated us to actually, I don't think they paid for it. I think the orchestra paid for it, but whoever paid for it, he was really fine. He also died in a plane crash. He was piloting the plane. And he was a loss, a serious loss, because he was a fine, fine conductor. And he also has an excellent recorded legacy to document that. So if I mentioned him before, well, he's here again. What can I tell you? I don't know if I can even keep track of all these people, but I think most of them have never been on the list before. Also deserving, Robert Spano. Robert Spano's Atlanta tenure yielded some absolutely first-class recordings on Telarc. There were no duds, I don't think, in that entire batch. I saw him the last time I saw him actually was still conductor of the Brooklyn Philharmonic, and he was doing Kullervo, I think it was like the U.S. premiere of the whole thing with the Brooklyn Philharmonic, and he did it really, really well. And I was there with my Finnish friends, and the consulate showed up and those people, and they said that the choir sang rather effectively in Finnish, and everyone did their Finnish things. And then he recorded it in Atlanta for Telarc at its first class. He also did, what was it, Vaughan Williams, a Sea Symphony, and a bunch more stuff. He's a very, very talented conductor. Really, really a first-class talent, and it would really be interesting to see where his career is headed. I mean, if you're interested in conductors who are up and coming, whether they're kids or not, I mean, whether they're young or not, but people who have real ability, Spano is definitely one of those. Karl Schuricht. Yeah, I should have mentioned him. Why? Oh, gosh, years ago, shouldn't I? I mean, he's had boxes from Decca, and he did that amazing Beethoven cycle with the Paris Conservatory Orchestra on Warner, which is just wonderful. It's as close to authentic Beethoven as we're ever likely to get. He was an interesting guy. I mean, he did Mahler and stuff when other people weren't in Germany and things like that. And just amazing Wagner, too. Some really fabulous Wagner stuff. A fine musician. Somebody who definitely deserves a shout-out now and again, and whose recordings, have survived and endured and been treasured for, now 70 years. Really? I mean, so sure. I mean, he belongs on a list. How about Pietari Inkinen? Another one of the Finnish mafia, the Finnish podium mafia, the Jorma Panula School of Conducting. Inkinen has been in Iceland doing Sibelius and other things. And he also, I think, made some recordings in New Zealand and is specializing mostly in Sibelius and some other things he's also done of other composers of that ilk. And he's a talented guy, too. He's very, very good. He's better at the neoclassical side of Sibelius than the romantic side of Sibelius, as most conductors today seem to be, because Tchaikovsky and Liszt in that school are kind of on the outs. And the conductors today are better trained to be a little cooler and more dispassionate. It's also part of the period instrument movement, too, the anti-romanticism that seems to be a major, major trend in the interpretive stance of so many artists these days. But he is quite talented, and his recordings in Iceland have been beautiful. Quite a few of them. They're on Naxos, and they're worth sampling if you haven't had a chance. So he's a guy to look out for. Myung-Whun Chung. How did I leave him out? Oh, how could I possibly have done that? I don't know. I just did. He was a flavor of the month conductor for Deutsche Grammophon for quite some time when he had the orchestra at the Bastille in Paris, and he was doing Messiaen and things like that, and French music. But he started off, remember, on Bis doing some slammin' Nielsen, which was never completed, unfortunately. And his Deutsche Grammophon legacy is, of course, more variable because the major labels, they didn't have the same vision when it came to artists and repertoire. And then he went and worked for Deutsche Grammophon in Korea and made a whole series. I have the box. It's right over here, actually, of his Korean Deutsche Grammophon recordings, which are really pretty mediocre, actually. The orchestra is only so-so, and his interpretations are, He did an amazing Daphnis and Chloe. Really a first-class Daphnis and Chloe. That's one of his great recordings. And there are quite a few other really fine efforts. So we'll see what happens to him if he pops up somewhere else and has a consistent program of recordings, and whether he has matured or changed in any way. I mean, that's the interesting thing about recordings as documents. We get to follow the careers of these people and see how and what they did. Then there's Yan-Pascal Tortelier. Yeah, there's another one you mentioned, another Chandos artist for the most part. Very, very good conductor from a very, very musical family. As we all know, he did Ravel and Debussy and French stuff, some really good French stuff, and some Respighi that was very, very exciting, and Three-Cornered Hat, and all kinds of decent, colorful Mediterranean style music, let us call it, the Latin school of conducting. And he's a very fine exponent of that school of conducting. He also made a fantastic orchestration of the Ravel Piano Trio, which he recorded with the Ulster Orchestra. So those are estimable recordings, definitely worth hearing. And he's a conductor who I usually enjoy. I mean, most of the time he's a very, very enjoyable guy in terms of his interpretations. He's colorful and he's direct and he's unfussy. And he did a first-class Dutilleux series as well, which is important. And Hindemith. Let's not forget Hindemith. That's also a very good series. Yeah, he's a good guy. Should have been on the list earlier. Shame on me. There. Ow. Okay. Anyway. And last but not least, the guy who I said I was adding at the last second, Lovro von Matacic. We just had the box, the von Matacic box, which is right here still because we just talked about it on Supraphon and on EMI. He was a Croatian guy who just did exciting, vibrant, wonderful recordings of all kinds of repertoire. Did a great Eroica. He did some good Bruckner, except for the fifth, which he did in a weird edition. Amazing Tchaikovsky. Terrific Russian music generally. Also very good opera recordings. Some very fine opera recordings. And one of the best, like Merry Widows with Elizabeth Schwarzkopf. I think he's the conductor on that thing, isn't he? And some of you mentioned his other opera recordings, a Cavalleria Rusticana, which is nice and sultry and thrilling. Yeah, definitely a good conductor. Belongs on a list. And so there you have it, my friends. 16 more. And I think with this list, we probably ought to call it quits because we could just wind up with a list of everybody. And then, you know, it's just a list of everybody. And we're drowning in fine work. It's a good position to be in, isn't it? You know, for all of the moaning and groaning about the end of the classical universe and all that stuff, how is it that we are surrounded by so much fantastic stuff and are so singularly ungrateful about it? It's astonishing, absolutely astonishing. But thank you so much for your suggestions. I love all of them, even the ones I disagree with. Let's be clear. You know, that's what a conversation's about. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree, and we have a great time doing it. Keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.